What an amazing day. We are now into our last hour before the awards ceremony and the drinks. This, I'm hoping, will be quite an interactive session. You've already been forced to interact in a way by when you registered, being asked these very difficult questions, which I have the lists of here. So in addition to getting our panel to talk about this, I also want you very much to contribute. I'm going to ask in a minute each of our panel members, who I'll introduce in a second, to talk for maybe, 3 or 4, 5 minutes at maximum about what the future of connectedness means to them. And that could be from the perspective of their discipline, their narrow area of research, just from their experience, or simply off the top of their head. It's entirely up to you how you want to respond to that question. In terms of the themes that all of you have already suggested, it was very interesting looking at the lists. There's a few people making sort of smart remark, well, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be super rich. That's a cop-out, I think that is. Quite a lot of people mentioning concerns about things like privacy and security. So, sort of the worries about the risks, if you like, of connectedness. Quite a lot of people also talking about more connection of various sorts, whether that means, deepening of links, strengthening of links, access to more services, resources, people. And then I think there's, some quite interesting policy responses that people have put here about, for example, it's going to depend on what happens with things like net neutrality. It's going to depend on what happens with things like wearable devices. So there are a variety of different ways, perhaps, about thinking about what connectedness will look like in the future. And I hope all of you can have a bit more, give it more thought to this before I come back to you for questions. Once our panellists have contributed, I will obviously take formal questions and answers in the normal manner, sticking up your hand. But you can also tweet. I gather that people have been quite active online throughout the day. So feel free to just tweet comments, questions as people speak. I'm hoping that more will keep an eye on some of these and notify me if there's something that we need to sort of flag up and address. So yes, let's have an online debate at the same time as one in a more formal way. With that, let's introduce our panel. I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. Probably because I couldn't do you all justice to your incredible talents and abilities. I'm going to start over here with Luciano, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. It's a bit warm, so I might actually take my jacket off at some point, ladies allowing. But apart from that, I'm a philosopher. I'm the professor of philosophy and ethics of information at the OII, and that's pretty much the introduction I want to provide. Thank you.
And in case you hadn't guessed, Luciano is the most smartly membered of the OII. Smartly dressed member of the OII at all times. Sarah.
Yeah, my name is Sarah Spiekermann. I wish I could say I'm a philosopher. I studied business and I'm chairing an Institute for Business Informatics in Austria. And my specialization is electronic privacy and ethical computing.
And we're very lucky to have you visiting us at the OII.
Yes, thank you.
Visiting. Me, I think everybody knows. Bernie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bernie Hogan. I'm a research fellow here at the Oxford Internet Institute. I'm a sociologist by training, also part-time computer scientist. At least I play one at conferences. And fun fact, when I did my PhD research, the data set that we created and then thus analyzed was the Connected Lives data set. So if you want some old school ideas of that, then you can speak to me after.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Clarke. I'm a DPhil student here at the OII in my last year writing up. So this has been a very nice break away from my desk. Thank you to everyone who's presented. My research looks at new technologies, civic engagement, and new models of public management in the digital age.
Hi everyone, my name's Kathryn Eccles. I'm a research fellow here at Oxford Internet Institute. I'm a historian by training, and I largely work around the digital humanities, so looking at how new technologies impact on scholarly behaviour and also contact between the public cultural heritage institutions and cultural heritage resources.
Wonderful, thank you for that. Quick technicality, Arthur, do you actually need us to pass around the microphone, or can you, no, so that you can just, as long as the microphone's in the middle, guys, we should hear us. We are obviously, again, recording this session, so just bear that in mind when you ask your question. I will, though, try and repeat questions, at least for purposes of audibility. But yes, if you can avoid saying anything too obscene, that'd be helpful. Right, I'm going to ask Kathryn to go first, simply because you were sitting in your chair the longest in the break and therefore you were best prepared.
Oh, I like to give the illusion of being prepared at least. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the future of connectedness through my research by talking about an art project that I've been involved with. And that's partly to answer a criticism that I heard earlier in the day, which was that internet researchers aren't interested in art or culture or meaning. And culture and meaning are really at the centre of my research activities. And they're the sort of driving force behind much of my inquiry. So that motivated me to talk about a crowdsourcing project that's about digital art and how projects like that can open up new meanings, new readings of connectedness. So I work with a project called Your Paintings, which is a project to digitise every oil painting that's in public ownership across the UK. That means that suddenly, rather than having a fraction of the number of paintings accessible to us that we can see when we walk through the doors of a museum or a cultural institution, we now get to see all of them whenever we want to. So simply digitising materials like this connects people to resources that are owned by all of us. You know, these things are ours. And so this democratisation, this change of access conditions, opens the door not only to the museum or the gallery, but to their stores, to their archives, to their processes. And I think those kinds of connections are really, really important to sort of make those more explicit and more understandable to the public. And I think they also, projects that involve crowdsourcing, people making their own meanings, people creating tags and data sets that reflect things that, words that they would commonly use rather than a sort of established ontology, create new connections, new ways of accessing data and objects. So allowing people to create connections between paintings that are about the things they're interested in, even if that's ribbons in somebody's hair or the number of dogs in paintings in the UK collection. It doesn't matter, you know, that's what interests people, and these sorts of projects allow those connections to come to the fore. I think they also allow new information clusters around objects, and that's important for lots of reasons. I think being able to see processes, being able to connect to lots of different resources shapes kind of informal methods of education, which can be really valuable to people. And I know from interviewing lots of the people who've been tagging these collections that it's motivated them to go out and seek new opportunities to learn things in formal and informal ways. So I think, you know, the future of informal education through digital platforms is really exciting. One thing that I wasn't expecting to find was really explicit connections to well-being through digital access to art. So simply the process, the cognitive process of tagging had a major impact on people's well-being, and understanding the extent to which new technologies can facilitate and to accelerate those encounters, I think, is a really important question for the future. I think thinking about access and enfranchisement, digital platforms, digital means of entering museums virtually allows people to connect to things that are important to them when they aren't able to do so through reduced circumstances, be those economic, physical, infrastructural. So new opportunities to bind people to the sort of pillars of society, the cultural pillars of society, I think will become increasingly important. And so to come back to Bibi's talk about disconnected life, we need to really think through these issues of disconnectedness, the importance of valuing those who choose to remain disconnected. For example, you know, if you want to enjoy a quiet, non-digital, non-technology focused visit to a museum, that should be preserved. But we should do everything we can to enable people who want to experience connectedness in this sector or any other to do so. And I just wanted to finish by saying that as a historian, I think digitization and access to community collections have already made a massive impact on communities, and I think the future for me is about the growth of these collections, the growth of these opportunities to enhance communities. So some of you might know about the Great War Archive, that is a project that was born here in Oxford and then rolled out across Europe, and in fact was mentioned by Angela Merkel a week or so ago as a real exemplar of how interconnected stories about experiences in the First World War and across Europe and beyond really should be put together, should be visible. So the Great War Archive is full of personal stories that are incredibly meaningful to the families that hold them, such as a photograph of an officer, which, when digitized, revealed that he'd written his wife's name in the ground by his feet, and she'd never known that. Or the tin containing a note to his wife and family thrown by an officer through a train window on his way to meet his death at the front. Those are incredibly poignant personal stories. But by connecting them to an authoritative digital archive through projects like the Great War Archive, they not only gain a new sense of importance to the families that hold those personal connections by making them part of our broader cultural inheritance, they also allow others to connect to them and to reflect on the many different meanings and experiences of things like war. And I think that means to be human.
So a few, small things like access to art and culture, but also a greater understanding of what it is to be human. Wow, okay. Amanda, top that.
Yeah, geez, tough act to follow. Everyone's going to be getting out their tissues over that story with a name in the ground. Mine is not that romantic or moving. So, what I wanted to talk about today is sort of what this phenomenon of digitally enabled societal connectedness, a lot of the different phenomenon and issues we've been discussing today, what that means for public sector bureaucracies and how they might think about engaging with those outside their walls, so with citizens or with businesses or with civil society organizations. In this sense, it sort of builds a bit off of the talk that kicked the day off from Nick. And I think I sort of want to discuss three issues that I think are raised by this sort of late, very enthusiastic kind of body of academic and popular literature that's cropped up around this subject. So, if you search for things like Government 2.0, digital governance, wiki government, open source government, government as a platform, the cult of the open, so open dialogue, open policy making, open public services, open data. Open is a very popular word, and I think we need to sort of poke a bit at this and think, sort of maybe dig below the surface. And I want to highlight sort of, I think, three issues that are raised by this sort of enthusiasm for connectedness outside government and for governments connecting into that connected world. Whether that be through things like crowdsourcing projects or deliberative policy experiments or co-production, so government and citizens collaborating together online to produce public goods and services. So three issues that I think we need to grapple with that flow from this enthusiasm. And the first is just sort of a question of practicality. And so I think the notion of kind of bolting it on that was raised initially today really captures this well. So, when we think about governments, bureaucracies, so I'm not talking about sort of elected representatives or political parties, but the kind of people who work in Whitehall, the sort of organizational model in which they work was developed sort of late 19th century, early 20th century, and in many ways was set up to not be connected, specifically to avoid the kind of corruption and undue influence that was thought to arise from having government decision makers have too many connections with outsiders and their individual interests that might not serve broader public goods, broader societal interests. And so I think the hangover of that sort of organizational culture and those the structures that flow from that endure today. And so in my research, I find things like civil servants starting a Twitter account with the intention of interacting more fluidly with outsiders, but then finding themselves developing 9-step tweet approval processes, or spending 3 years developing a policy on the usage of social media in which they're grappling with concerns like, can we retweet an organization? Is that an official government government endorsement? What if we find out that they have a position that is counter to the government of the day? Are we politicizing the public service? And in many ways, what you're seeing is this sort of original notion of controlling information tightly in government bureaucracies and restricting the number of ties they have to outsiders is now producing these kind of perverse outcomes in which governments are increasingly less and less present from our everyday lives because they can't carry that tradition on to the social web. So I think that's the first issue, is that sort of that organizational question and this question of bolting on new technologies to old organizations. The second issue that I think doesn't get raised very often, I think, and should be raised more often when we talk about, governments tapping into outsiders' expertise, and in particular in producing and delivering public services, is whether or not a lot of this might be sort of a neoliberal Trojan horse. So we get really excited about things like open government and wiki government and crowdsourcing government because it's associated with things like democratic empowerment and civic engagement. But a lot of governments have become more and more interested in these models at the time when their resources are scaling back because of austerity reforms. And I think that we might want to question what some of the motivations are of public sector actors when they turn to the internet as a means of involving the public in their work. Something like government as a platform, a model put forward by Tim O'Reilly, which suggests that governments should enable citizens and private business and civil society organizations to deliver services because they're better able to do so now online. I mean, that's pretty obscure language. And what exactly is the role of the state in this as a platform? How do we ensure that the needs of all citizens are met, that no one slips through the cracks? Does the crowdsourced government, is it representative of people's interests and needs? And are those who are often most in need of the services that public sector bureaucracies provide, are they respected in the system, and are they represented? And I think that the third.
Can I ask you to hold on to your third? Is that all right?
That's fine. Yeah, I mean it's basically a Snowden thing, so we'll get there anyways.
So we'll give you a teaser.
Yeah.
And you have to ask about it in a minute. Sorry to cut you down. I just want to make sure we get through everybody.
No, of course. Yeah.
Bernie.
Hi, everyone. So I think there's a connectedness is such an open word. We can fill it with so many things: information, internet, friends, life. The future of connectedness in the short term is likely to be about increased mediation. And increased mediation can be pernicious or it can be wonderful. When we talk of government as a platform or sort of curatorial processes, we think of the virtues of it, but there's also profit motives and incentives. The fact that awesome. I was hoping, so I'm not sure if anybody's been following the little tweet stream there. I injected a couple snarky things in there. I was waiting for when they would show up as a sort of demonstration of this. This is not moderated. This is simply just a list of whatever had that hashtag is going to go up there. And then someone says, well, maybe some of these things need to be more professional and more appropriate. And all of a sudden, what gets defined as in or out is now mediated. And we don't necessarily know what gets filtered out. Classic filter bubble problem, but it's very pervasive. The fact that the signification of our relationships to other people is now being held by third parties with a profit motive and not being held by a sort of a decentralized open platform or standard. The fact that these are not the servers that communicate who we are to each other, they are merely the clients, has serious consequences for who can say what and when. Whether we refer to certain censorship on behalf of search engines, the privileging of certain kinds of connections based on an algorithm from Facebook. Now, Facebook's EdgeRank, for example, does not say, you have denoted these people as the important people in your lives, so they will just passively float up to the top. There are technical ways to do that, but they're tedious. But instead it uses a series of passive cues that it defines based on a notion of performance. And the performance is not how do you make people happier, how do you make more social cohesion, it's how do you keep people on Facebook longer so that they click on more ads. If we are to continue on this, this route of consistently rationalizing our connections, we are also going to be on a route of having someone or something try to organize all of this chaos on our behalf. As we shift from increasing focus on situational connectedness, I'm connected to a place because I go to that place, or that place is meaningful, or the people in that place is meaningful, to a world where my exhibitional self is important. Look at I have X number of Twitter followers, they retweet at a certain level, that they will follow me at this point, or that I will get these sorts of hits. We're not merely digitizing or informatizing ourselves, we are inserting a third party in between our relationships, and that third party governs some of the ways in which we associate with other people. In the long term, there lie dragons. In the long term, we can think of digitized personal data stores, the decentralized mesh networks, ad hoc networks for maintaining connections in war zones, disaster zones. We live in a relatively stable, peaceful time. I did have a taste of the dark future when I was in Toronto and SARS hit and everyone was on lockdown in terms of what connectedness actually meant, because it was a very contagious virus and people weren't sure how the vector happened. And so there was a lot of uncertainty and thus a lot of reconfiguring of ties. We're going to have increasing numbers of incidents of these. If we ever lose antibiotics, this is going to be a very huge deal for us, and we will have very practical ways in which we want to reconfigure who we see, how we see them, and who regulates that contact. Is it going to be decentralized? Is it going to be Facebook now does crowd control? Is it going to be that we turn off the internet because we find it's not worth it? I guess no one can really predict. The mundane way is to say it's going to be relatively commercialized, that it's going to be regulated for a profit motive, and that most people will be fine most of the time, but it's up to us as scholars and public intellectuals to push on the margins of this to see who is excluded from such connectivity, what is excluded from connectivity, and how can we reel that back in and speak for those who are, and what is on the margins. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So, tough reminder about some harsh realities of how the internet works and how that's not going to change overnight. Sarah?
Yeah, I would like to first talk about my artistic creation, which is called The Ethical Machine. I'm writing a book while I'm here. It's more or less, it's the first project on the ethical machine. And what is the ethical machine? I mean, we are the greatest ethical machines around. If I dare to call myself a machine, a biological machine. But to a certain extent, I mean, I connect to what you say, because I see that our lives are more and more mediated through machines, or they're even just one-to-one buddies with us. For example, when we play a game that does not happen to be a multiplayer game, but we're just playing against a machine, we have a buddy that's a machine. And my hypothesis is that we right now are at a very important point in time where we need to sort out the relationships that we have with those machines. At the moment, these machines are operated by commercially interested parties, and there is a very clear hierarchy between us and those machines, which is the machine is smarter, more efficient, more enduring. It's a transhumanistic kind of vision that machines are better than us. And I think that we need to turn this wheel around and say, no, the hierarchy is the other way around. The machines are our slaves, and we now have to see how we make them serve us. And so I'm thinking about what these ethical machines that are our slaves, buddies, friends, whatever, but at the end they are our slaves, what these ethical machines should actually look like. And so I'm looking into a couple of dimensions. One of them being the senses, like Kathryn talked about connectedness. So I'm wondering, for example, whether looking at a digital picture gives me the same resonance, the same emotional and experience of happiness than looking at a true piece of art. In the Middle Ages, for example, it was forbidden at some point to use gold in pictures. Why was that? Because gold tends to reflect, and it tends to give us a more than two-dimensional experience of reality. And so with this introduction of perspectives, our enlightened vision of the world, we started to go to two-dimensional seeing. I would like our ethical machines to bring us back to reality. They could, connect us with more art than we ever had access to. But I hope they will also bring us to museums and give us some time off and encourage and motivate us to go and see the true art. So that's the senses. I also look into sound. This is the long-term project. The more immediate project is values in machines. So this is what I'm writing right now. My book coming out is called The Human Use of Machine Beings. And the whole idea is that the machines are embedding our human values. Now, values, as the philosopher on my right side will confirm, is a big word. I was wondering, what values can I focus on in this huge field? So I'm focusing on values that we can align with Maslow's pyramid of needs. The values that help us to flourish. And for example, at the very bottom, what we want to be is we need to be healthy. Yeah, that's the most. And we need to be on jobs. We need to have an income. We need to live. So if we automate everything, we are going to not have a prosperous life. And so the balance is to strike between automation and machines, automation, and having an identity and a work and an income. I could also look at health. This is and how machines can actually help us to be more healthy, to motivate us to go jogging, or on the other hand, to completely absorb us in mobile games, and then we wake up and our body is broken. So I walk up this hierarchy of needs, and at the end of the pyramid, also in the pyramid, are also other needs like security, freedom, dignity and reputation in a world of profiling and black boxes and knowledge creation. And then I bring it down, and this is my scientific work. When I go back to Vienna tomorrow with my team, we work on privacy by design, we work on anonymity revocation, we work on privacy impact assessment, and those more granular ways of building those machines in practice. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Luciano, you get the last word.
It's going to be difficult in 300 seconds, a bit of philosophy. The future of connectedness as a theme for a philosopher invites lots of different suggestions. The following one is a bit controversial. When we talk about connectedness, we tend to think about the connected things, forgetting that what matters really are the connections. That's the message. The next 4 minutes and a half is the elaboration. Think of a roundabout. Now, if you are from the city council, you place the roundabouts around, and then you start building the roads connecting the roundabouts, because you are insane. But if you are a normal human being, you think that roads come first, and the roundabouts are where the roads meet. That's the normal way of thinking. Now, if you start thinking about things as the Internet of Things, or humans as people in this room, or the chairs on which you are sitting as roundabouts, then our tendency to privilege roundabouts as ontologically first, the roads comes next, is obviously mistaken. Of course, first comes the relations, and then the entities are the emerging connection between those relations. Now, unfortunately, the kind of philosophy that we do and the sort of animals that we are tend to privilege roundabouts rather than roads. It's almost impossible to think about the world without thinking about the world as made of things. A testimony to that is the fact that our way of thinking is dominated by something called set theory. And as you know from elementary school, set theory is made of sets, big circles with things in it. And then you start thinking in terms of the properties of those things and the relations between those things, and then how these sets move across time so that a state of a system becomes another system. But that way of thinking has been sort of developed in our philosophy since Greek times, because we have been hanging on to the idea that roundabouts come first. And what I hope the future of connectedness will show to us is that processes and relations actually are, at least, someone like me would say probably more, but at least as important as the things that are being connected. So in this particular case, if you move from the roundabout to something a little bit more sort of philosophically relevant, you can picture the great battle between the great minds, Plato and Aristotle, as a previous battle between two other great minds, Heraclitus on the one hand and Parmenides on the other. And it was a battle between the thing and the process. I'm oversimplifying, forgive me for what I'm going to say, it's the philosophers among you. But in the battle between the thing and the process, 25th century of European philosophy has seen the thing winning. Now, we are at a stage in our life, and we're coming close to the 5 minutes, where we might actually be enjoying a more sort of sophisticated view of what comes first, or at least what is equally important as the thing. And that is the process and the relations between the things that we are talking about. Now, if that were the future of connectedness, I would welcome that enormously. It would mean that we would have acquired a more balanced view about what comes first and what comes next, what is more important, and what needs to be built first and what needs to be built later. It is not accidental then in some corners of California, they don't care about whether they are building things, they care about whether they are designing them. Because as long as they design the thing, whether you build it with that material or another in another country, it's irrelevant. The thing comes next. Is the processes inside that particular thing that matters? Is that where the added value is? So my little contribution to the debate is that we might actually see, hopefully, perhaps not now, perhaps the next generation, in the future of connectedness, rebalancing of our Western philosophy, as it were, where process and relations start becoming as important as the things that are supposed to come first in our life. Let's now move towards roads first and roundabouts next, not vice versa. That's the intelligent way of going forward. Thank you.
Luciano is fantastic. So I don't think you could have had a sort of more varied set of contributions, exposing to you beautifully, if you like, the sort of, wonderful diversity we have at the OII. I can now throw it open to the rest of you. So you can have specific questions for specific people. You can have comments, question you want to put to everybody. But I'm looking for some hands or some tweets. Okay.
I would like to continue with Bernie's question. Do you think the future of connected lives will be one of distraction, whether by Twitter streams or something else?
So I'm going to repeat that for the cameras. Bernie, do you think that the future of our lives will be one of distraction?
Presumably. Of course, insofar as we dedicate more of our time to things that are increasingly effective at competing for our attention, what would logically follow is, yes, the future will be full of more distractions. Whether we let that happen on default mode or whether we negotiate that culturally is another matter. So, for example, there's been a domesticating process of how people passively use phones in social settings. 10 years ago, the first BlackBerries come out, and it was only the most boorish of individual who would very deliberately stop what he was doing and show that he had an important email, often a guy, I know it's gendered, to signify this, and it was seen as very just gauche. And now a lot of people just quietly will just sort of make a little tweet or comment along the way. And so we've domesticated that particular axis. But in terms of streams of content that mediate our relationships to others being more distracting, well, I don't know. Probably, unless we actively seek out ways to foster to intentionally enact the connections we want, rather than go on default mode for the connections that will just keep us on a platform.
Sarah, do
I
you
would
want-
like to ask you a question. Don't you think in a few years we'll have a new digital divide? It's not going to be between the bright, intelligent and the dumb and the rich and the poor. There's going to be another one, which is those getting distracted and those who can focus.
Good prediction. Next question. Okay.
Just wondering for Kathryn, and I think it's really interesting when you go to an art gallery or a museum or whatnot, it's quite interactive now, but also people are starting to put whole museums online or whatnot. Do you see a future where there's still value in going to a museum? Because a lot of the time now interactive displays are people standing there looking at screens, and so you could do that from the comfort of your home. What will still keep bringing people out to museums and galleries?
Well,
So-
I think
Can I repeat the question?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
this is very dull. Yeah, do you see a future for museums? Why would people still go to the real place, the real thing, as Sarah said as well?
Yeah, well, and I think Sarah already answered this question, which is that, that you know, there are some amazing experiences that you can have with cultural artifacts online and mediated through new technologies. And I think those boundaries will continue to be pushed in the future, and rightly so, because I think it's eliciting really interesting information about what it is about that experience that's so important, that's so resonant. But I think they don't supplant the experience of going and looking at the real artwork or having an experience in that kind of live environment. And I mean, I can testify a little bit to that about the painting project that I've worked on, which is that people became obsessed with tagging. They used it as a positive form of distraction. It became completely obsessive. But it also drove them to go and seek out those paintings in museums. They wanted to see how large they were, because on a screen you can't tell. Some of them were the size of a room. Some of them were absolutely tiny. And so actually it's become a kind of exciting discovery. I know what it looks like on the screen. I know what it looks like in augmented reality or in, you know, on a smartphone versus a tablet, but I don't know what it's like to stand in front of that object and have that experience, and that's always going to be really important, I think.
As a brief footnote to that, certainly within the music industry, the free availability of most artists' catalog has actually led to an increase in the fetishization of that experience with the artist at that real-time moment. And live music has never been actually more pervasive than now.
That's a really good point. What's that?
Do you think these realities are going to change with more immersive technologies like Oculus Rift and things like that?
What impact will immersive technologies have on the arts and culture? Yeah.
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think we're already starting to see sort of, I guess, changes in sort of neuroplasticity around issues in, you know, of looking at art or experiencing culture through new technologies. So I think that we've started down that path and things will change, but I couldn't say how they'll change, except that it's getting easier through new technologies, things like you know, certain kinds of brain stimulation, to be able to figure out what's going on when we're in those experiences. So maybe it'll be the pushing at the door and coming, you know, the new technology will both drive and help us to understand what's going on there, which is pretty exciting.
I mean, can I just expand on that question, actually? One of the points that came up in the suggestions people have put online was the idea that somehow we're going to find increasing opportunities for more somatic connections. So the idea of the internet no longer being so much just about either sort of, you know, audible or visual prompts, but that there'll be more potential for, you know, either a more realistic experience or even for the potential of touch. Is that something that will change the way that we connect online? Anybody?
I mean, I think it will, because if you think about why people would, for instance, go to a museum together or to go to a gallery together, is because, you know, you want to stand around something and see it from multiple different perspectives together. And I think those technologies, you know, they are pushing at that door, aren't they? Want us to go down that. They want us to be able to experience that together. So I think it will change. It's just, you know, there's no limit to where these technologies will take us.
Probably there will be different interfaces.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we are all staring into this little thing, but when we have the full-fledged kind of Google Glass, artificial reality, augmented reality devices, we will be able to see, for example, 3D avatars and objects that walk with us as our bodies, and we will be able to talk to them, we will be able to ask them questions, we will be coached by them.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that will certainly arise within 15, 20 years, I think.
More questions? Yes.
Question for Sarah and also probably Luciano. You have an idea of an ethical machine, and I'm having some trouble thinking of a machine that can make ethical decisions. I know you're working out of a hierarchy of values, but just let me ask this question make the question concrete by asking what happens when these values conflict. I mean, I have some trouble believing it's so simple as just picking the higher element in the hierarchy, and that's the end of the decision process. And I'm also having some trouble believing that a single hierarchy exists, even though I know that there are several versions in psychology. They're fairly vague, I think, and ethical decisions are concrete, about concrete events. And I'm having trouble believing that these sort of broad psychological generalizations are going to be valuable in helping an algorithmic-driven ethical decision-making in a machine. Can you talk a little bit about those issues?
So is an ethical machine really possible? Even if you're working with a hierarchy of values, how do you ensure they never conflict, or that they apply in the same way we would in our daily lives?
I hope you didn't misunderstand me. The hierarchy of needs is also from where I bring together Maslow and the huge collection of potential values I could talk about. This is just helping me to make a selection for my book. I'm not at all establishing a hierarchy of values here, that one is better than the other. I struggle with this problem of value trade-offs and trying to understand what is more relevant than another. My experience in privacy engineering is that you solve trade-offs at a very detailed level of technological design or philosophical thinking. If you sit long enough on a concrete problem, then you can find a compromise, and then the trade-off goes away. I give you an example. Many people say that there's a trade-off between privacy and security, between anonymity and security. But in the end, what you can do is you can have national security and you can have anonymity, except that there are certain cases when you have to prosecute or follow a criminal, then you have to have processes of anonymity revocation that are transparent. If you have that, then you can have anonymity 99% of the cases for 99% of the people and still have national security. So that trade-off is being solved at this point of how do you design anonymity revocation in a transparent way. And I believe that trade-offs are generally solved at that very detailed level. Yeah, this is how I see it. Perhaps you.
Thank you. That's a difficult question. I can tell you what's happening currently. So we have a bit of a better sense of what it means to have a quote-unquote ethical machine in industrial robotics, where of course you implement protocols to make sure, for example, that safety regulations are in place so that people don't get killed if something goes wrong, etc. Whether that is ethics in the ordinary sense or is more like, well, that's a quote-unquote good robot because it's not going to kill someone if something goes wrong, I'm happy to have a debate on that, but it seems to be more like semantics than real philosophy. But what's happening of real interest is that that sort of mentality is being imported within military context in cyber war, where you might have the little robot on the borders of South Korea or the drone in Afghanistan. And the idea there is that if only we could find some simple ways of implementing a few lines of code such that, in the end, the robot in question is not going to do something that we would regret ethically afterwards, we will be fine. Now, the debate is ongoing as we speak. Geneva has happened recently, a meeting there. And what is the big risk here is that instead of succeeding partially, because as long as we don't succeed, we got people at least on the loop, if not within the loop. And someone somewhere has to take a decision. But if we succeed partially, then there will be confidence that that partial solution will generate a partial delegation, which will generate more confidence in terms of more rules and more delegation, and we might be on a slippery slope towards letting machines make decisions for us when ethical questions are at stake. So I'm worried about not failing, because that would be great. It means that we're not going to do it. But partially succeeding, that would be the real trouble. And that's where we are at the moment. So I don't know whether that addresses your question, but it's a scary scenario, basically.
One more quick comment from Sarah.
Yeah, just one comment. I very much appreciate what you say, because often when you talk about ethical computing, you go down this idea of that the machines are taking the ethical decisions. From my perspective, a machine doesn't take all of those decisions. I think ethical machines will leave the humans in the loop to take those decisions that we can take as human beings. I don't know what you... so the allocation of responsibility and tasks between machines and people is very important.
Well, don't know what we can do with this.
I think it's one to carry on with at drinks. I've only got probably about 5 more minutes, so maybe I have time for maybe one, perhaps 2 more questions. Anybody else want to come to us? Yeah.
So my question is to the sort of call for focus on relations versus things, which Luciano proposed. It's been somewhat echoed in all of these other calls to go to real places, and how do we sort of harness intermediaries to not really intervene too much. To what extent does discourse of Internet of Things, machine-to-machine technology, ever increasing smart learning, machine learning, really puts us in that direction? To what extent can we expect that to be the future of connectedness, or to what extent do we have to be proactive about it?
I'm not sure I can repeat that. Why don't we just answer that?
I'll hop in on that. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I totally followed your drift, but hopefully this addresses something that you're thinking about. I mean, I think one thing maybe we could do a better job of is in thinking about things is, and then better understanding relations is, there seems to be a lot of sort of social constructions of what the internet actually means. I mean, I find it sort of implicit in my case, in sort of models of government-citizen relations that emerge. There's this sort of beginning point, which is that the internet is very open and interactive, and it's networked, and it's not hierarchies, and it's not markets. And so this is sort of the beginning point from which these models of public management, of ways of thinking about government and citizens, and what their relations could look like, that's where they begin. And I think that beginning point is really problematic. And so maybe to get away from thinking of the internet and the social web as a sort of thing that we can then draw ideas from and build models from, we should look at the relations that actually take hold online. And I think we'd actually find that in many cases it's not as networked and open and democratic and interactive as we all assume. I mean, good scholarship takes that into account, of course, but I think it's really, really common when you're reading an article about the web and what it means for something in society to have these assumptions, and that's problematic. So maybe, I think I like that idea about thinking about relations. I think that gets us away from that.
Luciano?
Rather quickly, I think that one of the challenges that we face while answering that question is that in the past, anything like visual pattern recognition used to be organized around what we do. I mean, we look, we recognize, we identify. Now, this bottle. Whereas what is going to happen in the Internet of Things, if it's going to happen, is that this bottle will tell anybody who wants to know that it is a bottle because it had a little tag. And you don't have to have a smart computer or a smart robot to know that this is a bottle, because the bottle will tell the robot, idiotic as it is, that this is a bottle. And that is the real turning point. Once all things become digital in that sense, in other words, sort of broadcasting their identity, then we are going to face a scenario which is really strange. Because we haven't seen it. And what we have in terms of mentality is the little robot understanding this bottle, instead of this bottle telling the robot, I'm a bottle. And that is something that I'm rather curious to see, because I think we will see it in this generation.
What do you think? What do you think will stem from that? What will the implications?
I think what stems from that is that we're going towards an Internet of Things where basically there will be a divide between the digitally born bottle, which will make a difference, and the old bottle, which will be unable to tell, say, the little robot which has to move, say, bottles in a hospital, not something concrete, from there to there, will say, sorry, we have old bottles, they're not digital. This is, so throw them away, bring in the digital bottles, because they will be able to tell the little robot that. So because we don't have AI, despite something that you might have heard recently on the BBC, since we do not have anything vaguely resembling AI, what we really have is a different way of relating things to other things. And that's why I think that the relationship business is crucial in understanding connectedness in the future. That is going to make a difference. If we can think about that more carefully, I think we have a chance of shaping the future more decently. But we haven't been very good at that in the past, so I'm not terribly optimistic about doing it again.
Technically, though, it's very hard because the enthusiasm around RFID tags on everyday objects has vanished brutally when engineers found out about the physics. That basically a bottle like that communicating with a robot, we already have a problem back reflecting the communication. So my hope is that that this kind of economic and technical hurdles will not realize as the future that you have described to the degree that you have described it.
Okay.
So unfortunately, we need to stop here. But looking back on the contributions that we've had, a lot of discussion about the potentially positive applications which so many people are already enthused by, particularly if you look at the media, the potential for more informal education, more access to things like culture or art, for contributions to our well-being. Perhaps also, though, some very sort of similar concerns about the things that bother us again now. I mean, we didn't get back to Snowden, but I mean, clearly concerns about privacy and surveillance, the idea that they're being connected, that it's somehow maybe just not you and the other person, there's somebody else always watching or always mediating, something we mustn't forget. But I think actually, the other important thing that we perhaps maybe don't think about quite so much because we're so focused on the empirical possibilities are these bigger, sort of more philosophical questions about what it'll be like to live in a world where, as you say, our milk bottles talk to our shopping baskets, or when we really do understand, in a way actually that machines already are ethical, but we really maybe more fully understand what that means and what the implications are. So I think, as a sort of a way of wrapping up the day and looking back on it, I don't think you could have hoped for a more significant array of issues to be covered, and I thank you all very much for your contributions, and also to all of you for all of your questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.